Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 32 of Outlandish Talmud Stories, Outstanding Life Lessons. Tonight's class is titled Murder at the Purim Feast. Sounds like a very harsh title. Raz, hope this murder mystery isn't too scary before bed. Well, I'm going to try to unscarify it. It is truly an outlandish story tonight, but with truly an outstanding lesson as well as it is every week. So thank you for joining. I want to thank J.J. Thorne for dedicating tonight's class in honor of his wife, Jennifer, who supports him so much in his Torah study and his spiritual growth and development. And I know that he does the same for her. And it could be the two of them are watching together live. It's a wonderful way for a couple to spend their evening studying Torah together. So thank you very much. Yasher Koach, may Hashem bless both of you with continued success in your growth of Torah study and spiritual development, and much joy and happiness from each other and from your family. If you would like to dedicate a class to help us continue doing what we're doing, there's a link in the video description, and you can do just that. Also, I hope you've downloaded the source sheet for tonight. The link is also in the video description. Tonight we have a fascinating story. It's from the Talmud, Megillah. Megillah is really the tractate of Talmud that talks about the laws and the traditions and the history and the interpretations and the customs of Purim. Purim is coming up in just a few days. That's why we're going to be studying this story, which is a historical story about Purim, but it's going to illuminate a lot about Purim for us. It's going to take us on a journey, and I hope you're ready to come along. So let me give you a bit of background. You know that one of the four mitzvot on Purim, there are four different mitzvot: to hear the Megillah, nighttime and daytime. This year it's Thursday night and Friday. Also to give charity, matanot ledyonim, at least to two poor people. Also to give a food gift, at least two foods to one recipient, one friend, mishloach manot. And the fourth mitzvah is the mitzvah of seudah, of having a feast, the Purim feast, the Purim party, which everyone has in their families, in their communities. This year, very different than normal years because of COVID and other things going on. But however it is, that should never minimize in the simcha. The simcha has to be a simcha. So you have to work harder this year. If you don't have all of that support system of the friends and family you normally have, then we have to work even harder to inspire that joy of Purim. Now, you know how these Purim parties go sometimes. These parties sometimes become real feasts, fests. A lot of indulgence, a lot of food, sometimes a lot of drinking also. And we're going to talk about that because drinking on its own, I mean, Jews don't drink. We're not shikurim. We're not drunkards. We don't drink just to get drunk. So what's going on over there? How should you be orchestrating, conducting, experiencing your Purim feast? What's the goal of the Purim feast besides just indulging in a delicious meal with family and friends? I mean, we have Shabbat feasts, we have festival feasts, but there's something special about the Purim feast more than any other time of the year. And we're going to learn about a story from a Purim feast nearly 1700 or 1800 years ago and try to take away a lesson for us as well. So we're going to get started on the first source, which is from the Talmud Megillah, page 7b. Some background to the story. The main subject of the story is a great rabbi. His name is Rabbi. The text link should be in the video description. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, Allison, there is at the bottom, there's a link in the video description to tonight's source sheet. So the main subject of the story is a great rabbi. His name is Rabbi. Rabbi, the son of Nachmani. Rabbi is an Amora. He's a Babylonian sage around the end of the 3rd century. And he was a student in the yeshivas in Pumbedisa and in Sura. He was a wonderful student. I mean, he was a gadol. He was one of the leaders of the generation. Even as a student, his Rabbi Reb Huna in Sura would rarely rule a halacha without his prior student Rabbi alongside him concurring with what he would say. Eventually, actually the whole time he was a student there, his colleagues in Israel were always nudging him to come move to Israel, study there. He would have what to gain there, but they would have what to gain from him being there. but he never really conceded to their request, and he spent the rest of his days in Babylon. And eventually, after being just a student and a great sage, he in fact becomes the head of the yeshiva in Pumbedisa himself. So he's not just anybody. He's the head of the academy. And it's told that he welcomed and he brought in many new students into the yeshiva. So much so, there was a period during the year, it's called the Yarchik Kala season. That was the season perhaps during the summer months, so people had more time and they would come together. Even the regular workers, the Balabatim, who throughout the year could not join the yeshiva, but they dedicated these weeks to come study Yarchik Kala or during festival times. And it is told about Rabbah that he eventually would attract about 12,000 students each session. That is how great he was. He was so great that, and he caused a major disruption, because reports came to the Babylonian emperor that there's these few weeks or couple of months a year that there's so many people not paying tax money because they're not working, because they're dedicating their time in the yeshiva. 12,000 people who are not paying their commitments for those weeks or months. And the government got very upset about that. So they started to pursue Rabbah and to get him in trouble. So Rabbah heard what's going on, so he ran away because he knew he was going to be killed by them. So the story goes that he managed to escape them, and eventually he does pass away, not in the hands of the Babylonians. He passes away somewhat naturally. There's another story told about how he actually passed away, and the story goes that God had sent the angel of death to try to kill him and take his soul away. And whenever the angel of death tried to get near, he could never get near him, because Rabbah was immersed 24/7, every spare moment that he had, in studying Torah. His eyes, his mind was glued to the books. So he was so attached with studying and thinking Torah that the angel of death could not get near, could never have a moment to be able to extract, take away his soul and to cause him to pass away. Now, how does he pass away in the end? So two stories coming together. There's another episode where there was a big debate in heaven about a particular law. There was a law about a matter of purity and impurity. Is this nega? Is this, one of these afflictions that a person can grow on their skin? It's a spiritual ailment, pure or impure. There's a whole discussion in heaven. And God ruled that it's pure. But the Masifta Durakia, the heavenly academy, ruled that it's impure. So there was a dispute between God, the author of the Bible, and the heavenly academy. And they weren't sure. It was a gridlock. What should we do? So God said, you know what? We should ask Rabbah, the son of Nachmani, because he is the expert in these laws. Whatever he says, we will concede. Even God said that he is the expert. Whatever he says, I or you will have to concede to his word. Now, in this meantime, the angel of death is trying to kill him. So what the angel of death does is he ruffles some leaves, some branches outside Rabbah's home. Now Rabbah hears this commotion in the trees, in the bushes, and he thinks maybe it's the Babylonians who are coming to pursue him. Maybe they found him. And he does not want to be captured by them and killed by them, give them that honor, that pleasure. And so he stopped studying Torah. Hello? You can come in if you wish. I think in the classroom. He stops studying Torah and allows for the angel of death to take his soul away. And as he's about to pass away, he rules on this ruling of this debate in heaven. He rules tahor, he rules like God. And then a heavenly voice came out and said, Rabbah, there's nobody like you, and your word is the final word, and you have decided the debate between God and the heavenly academy, and in fact is going to be tahor, the ruling is going to be pure. That is a background behind the great Rabbah who we're going to be studying about tonight. Now that you have this understanding of who he was and how great he was, listen to this story. Let's read inside. Rabbah, this is not Rabbah, another person. Rabbah said a law about Purim. What's the law? A person is obligated to become intoxicated with wine on Purim until he is so intoxicated that he does not know how to distinguish between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. Cursed is Haman, of course, he's the villain in the story. Blessed is Mordechai because he's the savior in the story. the great leader, him together with Esther. And to confuse the two and to say that, shalom, I mean, to say, how to say it in a sober state, to say Mordechai is cursed and Haman is blessed, it just sounds almost blasphemous to say those words. Well, you have to get so drunk at your Purim feast, this is the law, Rabbah says, that you don't know the difference anymore between Haman and Mordechai, who's really blessed, who's really cursed. It's a strange law. Rashi says, the commentary says that the way you intoxicate yourself is with wine. Here it's in the non-bold. The Talmud doesn't say wine, but Rashi says wine because that reminds us of the whole Purim story. The fact that we're supposed to have an elaborate, lavish feast, that's also the law, a great mishteh. And there's a great commentary from the Kedushas Levi, which was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, one of the colleagues of the Alter Rebbe, one of the first Hasidic masters. And he says a beautiful thing. And I'm mentioning it now because we're going to expound upon this later. It's going to, on a new depth, on a new level. He says, we know that Purim has a similarity to Shavuot. Shavuot was the day of the giving of the Torah, right? But the giving of the Torah, we received it, but with a lot of challenge, as we're going to learn about soon. And then Purim, we sort of re-received the Torah. We recommitted ourselves to the Torah. It's like a second day of the giving of the Torah. So Shavuot is an interesting law, different than every other festival. When it comes to all festivals, there's a dispute. Is the day of the festival like Pesach, like Sukkot, like the other festivals? Are they days supposed to be dedicated to Hashem, to God, prayer and study and being in the synagogue? Or should they be days of benefit lachem, benefit to you and I, enjoying the physical delights of food and drink? One or the other. And so we make maybe a compromise. But when it comes to Shavuot, the festival of the giving of the Torah, everybody agrees that there has to be some benefit to you and I as well. Meaning it cannot just be a day of Torah study and of prayer, but it has to be a day of also physical benefit, enjoying the foods and the drink and the feasting of the festival. Why? Because it's the day we receive the Torah, and we should show God that we're happy. We're happy to receive the Torah. It's not a burden on us. So we don't have to always run to shul and be away from the family, but we should be home and enjoying a feast and enjoying the cheesecake or whatever it is. We're happy that we receive the Torah. So Purim is a rededication to receiving the Torah once again. So also we have to be happy, not just with reading Megillah and performing mitzvot for others, but also the physical benefit of enjoying good foods, good wines, good drinks during the feast as well. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That's beautiful. But why the wine? Why the intoxication? What value, what virtue is there in becoming drunk? Okay, well, let's find out. Let's read the story that happened. Rabbi and Rabbi prepared a Purim feast with each other. One year, Rabbi hosted a Purim feast. This is the subject of our story. And he invites his colleague, Rabbi Zera. Come, join us, join our family for the Purim feast. There wasn't COVID back then. Fine, he accepted the invitation and he came. And they became so intoxicated, they were so drunk, to the point that Rabbi arose. Come, Rabbi. Rabbi got up. The Shakthi le Rabbi Zera, and he slaughtered Rabbi Zera. He murdered him. The next day, when he became sober, and he realized his colleague is dead, lying on the floor from last night, right? Rabbi wakes up from his drunkenness, and he sees he's dead. He sees his colleague is dead on the floor. So he prays to God for mercy, and he revives him back to life. It's a crazy story. The next year, Rabbi again gives a phone call, or in those days a message to Rabbi Zera, and he says, let the master come and let us prepare the Purim feast with each other again. Are you going to join me again this year for the Purim feast? What did Rabbi Zera respond to Rabbi? He said, miracles don't happen each and every hour. They don't happen all the time. I'm a little concerned about what happened last year. I'm not sure if it's going to happen again. You're going to kill me again, but you're not going to be able to bring me back to life again. So I have to refuse your invitation, but thank you so much. That's the story. Victor, you hear it? That's the story. Read it through. We just read it.
The thing, right?
Yeah. Rabbi slaughters Rabbi Zera at the Purim feast because they were both drunk. Killed him. One sage slaughtered his colleague, the other sage, at the Purim feast because they were so drunk. The next day, he brought him back to life. The next year, he invites him to come back, and he says, no, I'm not sure if miracles happen all the time. I don't want to rely. Now, this is a very strange story. So hard to understand. First of all, there's many questions over here. First of all, people have gotten drunk before. And people get drunk, they do a lot of silly things. And they say a lot of silly things. And they do a lot of things which they regret. It happens to all of us, the best of us. But even the average person, who kills? Who murders when they're drunk? I mean, I've been drunk. A little bit. I can say that online. I think I have. I don't know. I wouldn't remember. But to go and murder somebody, you don't murder. Chas v'shalom. And we're not talking about anybody. We're talking about Rabbah. You missed the introduction. But Rabbah, the greatest sage of the time, who had 12,000 students, he's a tzaddik. He's a righteous, pious, holy, spiritual person. Even if he's drunk, even if he's doing uncharacteristic things, to go and murder, it doesn't make any sense. How could Rabbah be a murderer? Question number one. Question number two, so he murders him, and then what happens? He finishes his feast, and he's tired, and he goes to sleep. And the next morning he says, oy vey. He wakes up, he's feeling all refreshed, he slept off his wine. Oy vey, my friend is lying on the floor dead, I better do something about it. He prays to God, he brings it back to life. Really? The moment you do, you kill somebody, chas v'shalom, wow, you panic right away. Why don't we call the doctor, call the ER, call 911, we have to bring it back to life. I don't know, you wait till the next morning. Why? Question number three. He brings it back to life, and he sends it back home. Does it say anywhere that he asked for forgiveness? Does it say anywhere that he was so sorry for what he did? Was there any regret, any remorse? Rabbi Zera, for whatever reason, didn't take him to court, didn't call the police on him, but he himself, as a mensch, a simple person would have gone over and asked for forgiveness and apologized. How much more so the great sage Rabbah? He doesn't go and apologize. Everything goes back to normal, as if nothing happened. What does that mean? Question number four. What a chutzpah. To invite him back next year. You're not ashamed of yourself. You made such a mistake. You fell so low to go murder somebody. And now you're going to pick up the phone as if nothing happened. Hey, you coming this year? You expect him to come? What's your Rabbah thinking when he invites him to come back next year? He brought him back to life the next morning. Yeah. So the next year he invites him again. What are you inviting him again? And the final question I have is, look at Rabbi Zera's response to the invitation. What would you expect his response to the invitation should be? He should have responded, are you out of your mind? You're a murderer. You killed me. Don't ever call my phone again. I don't want to see you. I'm deleting you from my phone, from my lists. He doesn't answer that. What does he say? Miracles don't happen all the time. In other words, sounds like I'd love to come, and I have a great time with you. I'm just a little concerned that maybe you're going to kill me, but that's not the worst thing. The worst thing is that, if you get bring back to life, that's okay. You did it last time, but maybe it won't work that you're going to bring back to life. That's the response you give. The response you give is never. I don't want to see you ever again. What a difficult story to understand. Just close your eyes and picture what happened over here. Imagine two colleagues in a neighborhood and one murders the other on Purim night. And then obviously he's a special person to bring it back to life. But imagine the consequences of that. There seems to be no consequences over here. What's going on? Strange, huh? No, you're right. So let's try to unpack this because the commentaries are filled with all different kinds of interpretations. So, Vic is asking, did it really happen? It's recorded in the Talmud. Let's figure out if it really happened. So we have a number of schools of thought, different commentaries try to approach the explanation in different ways. And I want to present to you a few. First, we have a school of thought, a number of commentaries that say, this that the Talmud says, that Rabbah slaughtered and killed Rabbi Zera was not literal. He didn't literally kill him. Right? The commentary, the Maharsha, who's always printed at the back of the Talmud, he says, Ke'ein shachar. It's like he killed him, but he didn't really kill him. Meaning, people get drunk sometimes. So sometimes people get drunk, but they're still functional, they're walking around. Sometimes you're so trashed, you're so stoned, you're completely had it, you drop. and you drop on the floor, you're lying in the gutter, and you look almost lifeless. Okay? And it's a little scary if you ever see somebody like that, because you could think they're dead. And then you got to feel their pulse, and you feel something is beating, but you're not sure. You call the ER, they come and they're going to pump them out, they're going to bring them back to life. It's like they're dead. Or one of the other commentaries says the word shakthi with the shin can be read with a sin, like sachte. Sachte means he squeezed him. He totally squeezed the life out of him. Not literally taking his soul and his life away, but he got him way too drunk. Drunk to the point of being almost like he was dead. And so therefore the next morning he didn't do a miracle. He didn't bring him back to life, but he revived him, gave him a lot of fluids, he nurtured him, gave him rest, gave him sleep, gave him some of those pills and seltzer and Alka-Seltzer that you have afterwards. And then he came back to life. Why did he do this to him? I don't know if it was planned. I mean, take another l'chaim. At parties, there's always that guy that's trying to get everyone else drunk. He's not drinking anything himself, but he wants to get everyone else drunk. From now on, if anyone comes to you, come make a l'chaim, you say, you make together with me. Don't force me to make it. You also have to make it. Right? So that's one school of thought, that therefore to interpret the story not literally. Now, it's a little more easier to accept that commentary, except the problem with it is that it's not the simple implication of the Talmud reading, because the Talmud clearly says Shakthi. The word Shakthi is to slaughter. And the Talmud then says the next day, Hechya, the next day he revived him, brought him back to life. So if you read the literal story, I mean, you could squeeze in this interpretation that it's not literal, but you have to have a lot of audacity to be able to read and interpret a story that's not the way it's exactly written. So maybe we have to try to find a commentary that could help us understand the text literally a little better. Okay.
There's a lot of commentaries of this.
Next, we have another school of thought. A number of commentaries that say that Shakthi, when it says that Reb Zera was slaughtered, he was killed, it's literal. He really did die. Rabbi could kill somebody? So the commentary says he died, but Rabbi did not kill him. He did die, but it wasn't Rabbi's fault. Because he points out an interesting, there's a letter that's missing that should have been in the Talmud. So if you look at the original Hebrew Aramaic, we didn't have it. I don't have the English over here. But in the original Aramaic, it says, Come Rabba, Rabba got up, Shakthi le Rab Zera, and slaughtered Rab Zera. Now I just put in the word and, which is a verb. If it would have said Shakthi le Rab Zera, and he slaughtered Rab Zera, that would be the continuation of Rabba's activity. He got up and slaughtered Rab Zera. But the Talmud misses that vowel. If you would make a comma there or a pause, you'd say, Come Rabba. Rabba got up for whatever reason to do what he wants to do. And in a separate statement, Shakthi le Rab Zera died. Why did he die? Maybe he died from too much alcohol. Maybe he died from overdose. Who knows what he died from? But the death was not the murder of Rabba. So this commentary learns that Rab Zera really did die, not to Rabba's fault. Rabba realizes the next morning, Oivei, my colleague, is dead, and he performs a miracle and brings him back to life with the prayer, with the help of God. So this commentary is a little more literal in terms of the actual word slaughter implies death, and he really did die. And also takes away the accountability, the liability, the negligence of Rabba being a criminal and murdering someone. Except that it's also not the simple implication of the words of the Talmud. It's sort of trying to squeeze it in because there's a vav missing, the word and is missing, so we can separate the sentence into two different parts. Rabba gets up and does his thing, and then Rab Zera is slaughtered. Who slaughters him? He dies. He doesn't say what from. That is not the simple reading of the Talmud. The simple reading of the Talmud is Rabba gets up and slaughters and kills Rab Zera. So again, hard to imagine that is the true meaning of the Talmud. By the way, just to expand this conversation and to understand Rabba a little more, there is a Talmud in Shabbat, in Tractate Shabbat, and the Talmud talks about people are born on different days. They are born with different natural inclinations. We know all of us are a mixture of nature and nurture. So you're born with a particular natural disposition and personality, and then also nurture based on Your upbringing, your home, your parents, your school, your education, your environment, right? That also conditions you. But we're also born with a particular nature. Nobody's born just blank. So the Talmud says, depending on the day you're born, will define what kind of nature you have. Not only that, I'm not going to get into all the days right now, but also the hour that you're born. Because there's this concept, every hour of the day is being governed by a different mazal, a different constellation in heaven. And then the Gemara, at that time, the Gemara talked about 7 planets, 7 constellations. Well, they considered the constellations that govern. And there are 7 of them. And one of them is called Mazal Ma'adin. Ma'adin comes from the word dam, the constellation of blood. Which is which planet? It's in the news nowadays because we just landed rover on planet Mars, the red planet, right? Yeah. We're getting live feed from there. Maybe we're looking for life over there. Who knows? You never know. So if you are born at the hour of Mazal Ma'adin, when the red bloody constellation is governing, the Talmud says, you know what your personality is going to be? Your personality will be a bloodletter. You'll be somebody who causes bloodshed, which means you'll be a murderer. If not a murderer, maybe a thief. If not a thief, maybe a shachet, a slaughterer of animals. If not that, maybe a mahal, maybe someone who circumcises children. Something related to blood, maybe a doctor, maybe a surgeon. Now, Rabbah was once teaching this idea, and Rabbah said, I got news for you. I was born in the hour of Ma'adin. I was born during that hour when the bloody red constellation is governing, and I don't let any blood. I've never shed blood before. So he wants to disprove this. He wants to say, maybe it's not so true that you're stuck with that nature based on that constellation because it didn't apply to me. So what did all the students respond? What did his colleagues respond? They said, Rabbah, maybe you've never shed literal blood, but you sit on court cases and you rule in the favor of some but against others. And some of your rulings are very harsh rulings. So you do spill people's blood, their kishkas, you pour money out of them. Who knows what you do? You're also a bloodshedder because of your role in life. So the conclusion of that Talmud is that Rabbah never actually shed blood, but he was harsh against some people. Now, hold on a minute. We have our story. In our story, Rabbah shed blood. He slaughtered Rabbi Zera. So maybe you want to say that story didn't happen yet. Maybe that story happened after he taught this teaching about never having shed blood, even though he's born in the Mazal Ma'adin. Maybe. But we see Rabbah has some inclination towards bloodshedding, possibly. Or other commentators come along and say, even Rabbah, who was born during Mazal Ma'adin, during the red bloody constellation, he would never fall trap to being able to actually shed blood. Don't suspect him. Don't suspect the story being a result of him being born in that constellation. Because there's a very famous teaching of Maimonides. Maimonides quotes this Talmud and he says, of course, everybody's born with a particular nature. Some people are born with a nature to be more short-tempered and hot-blooded, or more angry, or more intolerant, or more selfish, or more greedy, or the other way around, or more kind and selfless, and more gracious, and more generous. Everyone's got a different kind of nature. But the Rambam says clearly, which is a very central Jewish belief, that no matter the nature, no matter the disposition you're born with, you're not controlled by that. You are inclined, you are influenced by that, but you're never controlled by that, because to suggest that you're controlled by that would actually take away from from free will. We believe in free will, which means it might be harder for you because you may be more inclined towards something, but you always have the ability to control yourself and your behavior, which is a very important teaching, because people who have, unfortunately, tendencies towards certain things, and they sometimes think they don't have control over it, and then they blame their nature, blame their tendency, blame their upbringing, blame who knows what, blame everybody except for themselves. And the Rambam says, stop blaming. Take more control of your life. You're able to, even if it's harder, and for some people it's indeed very, very challenging. So we can assume Rabbah was in a lot of control of himself, right? Rabbah was a very great person. So getting back to where we started, what's governing it? He killed him, he didn't kill him. The literal reading of the Talmud sounds like he did kill him, but how can we suspect Rabbah of killing somebody? We have all that questions they're trying to solve. Then we have a whole school of thought and answers coming from many works of Kabbalah. mysticism. And many of the Kabbalistic works approach this passage of Talmud, and they say what's being written over here is metaphoric. It's a metaphor. It's not real. It's not a literal story. Rabbi slaughtered Rabbi there, the Purim feast. No. It's a metaphor. What's it a metaphor for? There are all different kinds of explanations. For example, and this is not so uncommon to find in many places in the Talmud. There are stories told in the Talmud where the story is so outlandish, it's so bizarre, almost sounds completely impossible. And many of the commentaries or the Kabbalistic commentaries write, it's not literal, it's an allegory, it's a mashal, it's a message, it's a teaching being delivered through this strange story. It's very easy, it's very geschmack, it's very appropriate to deliver messages through allegories and stories and metaphors. So here's also a metaphor. For one example is that Rabbi and Rabbi had two very different styles of learning, different methodologies. Rabbi was known to be an oiker harim. Rabbi was somebody who was a very in-depth student. He took every word, every passage, every line of the Torah, and he ripped it to pieces, and he wanted to go deeper and deeper to understand the depth of its meaning, not so much the breadth, to cover a lot of ground. He wanted to stop and pause and understand deep into what's being said over here. Rabbi Zera had a different approach to learning. Rabbi Zera was more a breadth kind of person. Let's cover ground. Let's have a lot of knowledge, a lot of information. How well do you understand it? How deep did you get into the knowledge? Do you understand the core, the essence, the logic of what's being said over here? Let's get deeper and deeper. Rabbi Zera didn't focus on that. And the two different schools of thought. How do you approach it? How to study Torah, how to study anything for that matter. Do you go slow, cover less ground, and go deeper? Do you go faster, cover more ground, have more superficial understanding? Different schools of thought. But Rabbi, who represented one, obviously, and Rabbi Zera represented the other, they butted heads. Because when they were running the yeshivot and setting up curriculums, they were butting heads. How should the curriculum be set up? So Rabbi slaughtered Rabbi Zera at that Purim feast, which means Rabbi somehow influenced or overpowered or berated Rabbi Zera for his methodology of learning. That's not how you study Torah. I'll show you how to study Torah. And somehow he came out with the upper hand. So that's an example of how that story could be a metaphor for another idea that's being expressed. Now, we could interpret the Talmud like this, except, as is, like I said, many stories of the Talmud are interpreted allegorically, except in this story, it seems problematic to suggest that way. Why? Because notice the context of where the story is being placed. This story is on a page of Talmud that's discussing the laws of Purim. In fact, the law preceding this was the teaching of Rabbi. The Rabbi gave a halachic instruction, a halachic command. He said, you are obligated to drink wine on Purim and your feast until you become intoxicated and drunk. You know, the distinction between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. That's a law. And then later on the page, there's more laws being discussed over here. And in the middle of the story, you're going to tell me that in the middle of a page of laws, they stuck in a story that's a complete metaphor and allegory for something that's totally not legal by nature? It doesn't make any sense. If it be placed elsewhere on a page full of stories, which you have those pages in the Talmud, fine, it makes sense. But the story is stuck over here on a legal page during a legal discussion. It's hard to suggest that this story is just a metaphor and an allegory. Therefore, what we want to be able to suggest is that the story is literal. And the story really happened. And the Rabbi really slaughtered Rabbi Zera. And there's some kind of legal instruction, there's some kind of lesson that we can all learn out from there. But at the same time, our questions have to be solved. How does Rabbi become a murderer? Right? Rabbi doesn't ask for forgiveness. Rabbi invites him the next year to come. Rabbi Zera is tempted to come. How do we answer? So, I want to tell you a final explanation. This is an explanation that was given at a Purim Farbrengen in the year 1984 by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, just to explain those Purim Farbrengens when the Rebbe was alive and giving Farbrengen. So in many homes, in many communities, the Purim feast is the time that everybody goes a little wild, a little meshuggah, drinks a little bit, and then they conk out. Yeah, you fall asleep eventually. Until your wife nags you, kids, you got to get the kids, put them to sleep. Okay, so it's one of those endings. But in Crown Heights or in Brooklyn, it happened in other places also, but especially after your Purim feast, then you went to 770. And then the night just began. Because the Rebbe would teach Torah and deliver discourses for the next 5-6 hours. You couldn't be drunk because you needed to be alert and awake. And in fact, some of the deepest teachings and greatest ideas that were taught on Purim night, at Purim Fabringa. That's the time the Rebbe let loose a little bit and maybe said a little extra l'chaim more than normal. And if you study some of those Fabringa and some of the talks that were given, very deep and profound and very geschmack, very enjoyable. A lot of essential Jewish themes were spoken about. So in 1984, the Rebbe addressed this story. How could it be that Rabbos kills Rebbe's heir? And the Rebbe says, we have to straddle with two different extremes. On the one hand, we want to suggest that the Talmud is literal. It really happened. Let's not make up stories and squeeze interpretations that don't belong there. On the other hand, we don't want to suggest that Rabbi was a criminal. How do we blend these two things together? And so the Rebbe gave an explanation that is so amazing and so deep, and it teaches us about Purim. And so this is the takeaway, and now I want to share it together. You ready? Good. To understand this story, we have to go back about 1,000 years. More. It's a story in the Torah. Vayhi bayom hashmini, in the portion of Shmini in the book of Leviticus. Shmini means the 8th day. 7 days after the Jews and Moses are practicing assembling and disassembling the tabernacle, the Mishkan that we're reading about now, were commanded to build. And on the 8th day, which is the first of the month of Nisan, finally the Mishkan was dedicated. It was built to service in, to worship in. We now have a tabernacle, a home for God in our community in the desert at the time. Could you imagine what a festive, joyous day that was? After all this effort, receiving the Torah, and then there was the sin of the golden calf, and God says, build for me a home, and I will dwell in there. They finally built it. And there was a lot of pomp and a lot of ceremony on that day, and there were different sacrifices and different slaughtering of animals and different kinds of worship. It was a very exciting day, and then Moses gives a blessing to the people. Everyone was on a high. And then a tragedy happened. At the greatest of moments, Aaron had 2 sons, Nadav and Abihu. And the Torah says they came in to the temple, they offered an Eish Zarah, they offered some kind of sacrifice they weren't supposed to. And what happened? They died. Aaron lost 2 sons on that day. Tragedy happened. Now, God turns to Moses and to Aaron and says, Bikrovai ekadesh. I have sanctified myself through those who are close to me. Meaning, Moses, this is how Rashi says, Moses turns to Aaron and says, I knew on this day there's going to be some kind of sacrifice and God's going to sanctify himself through those that are close to him. I thought it's going to be me and you, says Moses to Aaron, because you and I are the closest to God. We're the leaders. I didn't realize that your 2 children, Nadav and Abihu, are even greater than us. God considers them closer to him than we are. And therefore God took the life of your 2 sons as some kind of sacrifice, some kind of offering, but he did it through the people that are closest to him, who he loves most. In other words, this wasn't so much a punishment. They didn't do necessarily anything wrong, but rather God took their life because of how holy they were. What happened over there? They did something wrong, didn't do something wrong. They were guilty. They were very holy. Why are they being killed? Why are they dying? How to explain this tragedy? So there's a number of explanations about what they maybe did wrong. Maybe they didn't want to get married. Maybe they didn't want to have children. Maybe they spoke against the authorities. But if you look at the Torah's literal reading, the very next passage of the Torah, after the story of their death, is the command that God says to Moses and Aaron that a Kohen, a priest, cannot enter into the temple, cannot perform worship in the temple if they are drunk and intoxicated from wine. Why would this be the choice of the next instruction after the story? So the Gemara learns out. That tells us what their mistake was. they entered into the tabernacle drunk. Now you can imagine there's a lot of spirits, a lot of l'chaims were flowing that day, right? All the l'chaims came out, l'chaim, we have a mishkan, we have a temple, we have a tabernacle. It was very exciting. You could say l'chaim, but then you can't go into the temple and worship. That's the law. But they went in and they worshipped. And the very next instruction was God said, you can't do that anymore. That's wrong. Oh, right. But hold on a second. So they were wrong. They were drunk. They went against the law. So then why is God saying, Bikrovai Kadesh, I'm sanctifying myself to those who are most beloved to me, who are those who are closest to me. How are they closest to you? They did something that was unfavorable in your eyes. They went into the tabernacle drunk. You don't worship God when you're drunk. You can't do anything serious when you're drunk. You don't engage with your spouse when you're drunk, because when you're drunk, you're not serious. You don't even focus on what you're doing. You have to have your senses about you when you want to express love to your spouse, love to somebody, love to God. It's not a joke. You have to take it seriously. When you're drunk, you're lightheaded. Right? Yeah. Correct. So here, I want to introduce you now to the text number 2 on the sheet. Here we have a text from a commentary from the Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim was a commentator on the Torah about 500 years ago, Reb Chaim ben Attar. He was like a Kabbalist also. He wrote deep spiritual interpretations as well on the Torah. And he unpacks this whole episode with many, many explanations. It's a very famous, lengthy Or HaChaim. But here he says one explanation that is so deep and profound. I've even quoted in the Hebrew because I want to refer to it because his words are so precious. Let's read it in English first. The English is not mine, so it's not a literal translation, but it's what I found online. Listen carefully. Another approach to the word Vayamutu, and they died, focuses on the nature of these sons' deaths rather than on the fact of their deaths. How did they die? The Torah says, "B'karvatam lifnei Hashem," you came close to God. To describe that due to their love for God, these people came too near to the celestial source of light, which has a deadly effect on man. This is the mystical dimension of what is commonly known as death by divine kiss, the kind of death experienced by Nadav, by Aaron and Moses eventually. The deaths of Nadav and Abihu were similar to the death of all other completely righteous men. There's a way to die simply because your soul escapes your body. It transcends to God. It unites as one with God. God kisses you. It captures the soul. And that's the nature of how the righteous die. The kiss of death. The Torah alludes to the fact that through these righteous people, though they felt that they were approaching an area which resulted in the kiss of death, they did not flinch and kept getting closer. In the Hebrew it says, they knew that this is what they're about to do is going to cause their souls to expire. They knew this because of their great spiritual ecstasy in performing and entering the temple. Nonetheless, they continued because they wanted to taste dveikut. There's a lot of words over here. Dveikut, the cleaving. Ni'imut, the pleasantness. Arivut, the sweetness. Yudidut, the close friendship. Charivut, the love. Chashekut, the yearning. Metikut, again, the sweetness. Ad klot nafsham, until their souls expired from them. In the English, they attained the state of religious intoxication. The desire of their souls to fuse with the divine was so overpowering that they no longer made decisions in which their powers of conscious perception were involved. Skip a few lines. Basically speaking, we're dealing with the natural abhorrence each soul has for the need to be imprisoned inside a mere body. It's always the soul's desire to escape the body. Nadav and Abihu's souls experience such an urge in an unusual manner. Every soul, if you ask a soul, if you could talk to a soul and you say, "Hey man, how you doing?" You know what they're going to say? Even if you in your lifetime are treating your soul pretty well, and his interests and his desires and his agendas, they're going to say, I'm not feeling at home. I'm not feeling in my element. I'm trapped by the body, by the animal soul, by the distractions, by, this guy who's my host. He loves to eat, he loves to dress, he loves to golf, he loves to surf, he loves to get distracted, he loves to hate, he loves to be jealous, he loves to be selfish. He loves to do all kinds of things that I have no feeling for. right? So you ask the soul, so where would you prefer to be? What does the soul answer? I want to go back home. I'm a stranger in this world. I want to go back home. Now that soul, even in the most righteous of people, for sure if somebody's not very righteous, the soul wants to go back home. But even in the most righteous of people, at the end of the day, living in the limitations of this physical world, a soul can never experience it and enjoy what it truly desires in its most potential way. The soul wants to go back home. And there comes to moments or experiences where if you achieve such a level of spiritual, religious transcendence, a soul can leave a body and a person can expire. That's how holy they were. And they knew it's going to happen, but they still continued to do it because they wanted to have that taste of that connection. In other words, thank God we don't understand everything in this world. Thank God there's a lot that we just cannot fathom and cannot look into. Because sometimes when we look into things that we can't know, that we shouldn't know, that are beyond us, we freak out, right? We get exposed to things that we cannot handle. What does it create? It creates trauma. Trauma is simply things that we cannot tolerate, we cannot understand, right? We sometimes don't want to know the truth. We sometimes can't handle the truth, and that's a good thing. Look at our brains. Our brains are unbelievable tools. You know what's a great tool of the brain, a great function of the brain? It's a wonderful filter. The brains are so clever. The brains are bodyguards. The brains know how to protect us. Your brain sees and hears much more than you think you're seeing and you're hearing, but the brain filters out a lot of things which you don't need to know and are not healthy for you and not good for you. The brain knows to deliver a small amount of information to you just to make you happy and let you think you know what's going on. But there's so much you don't know and you shouldn't know because it's not good for you. What happens if you get to pure in the other side? What happens when you get to the school and find out about things that are way beyond what you want to know, what you can know? It's very traumatic. It could take you to a different place. It could make you expire sometimes. We learned a few weeks ago about the 4 sages that went into the orchard, they went into the paradise, they went into heaven, to wanted to see on the mystical side what's going on, what's the real truth behind everything. And what happened to those 4 sages? One of them died. Ben Aved died there. One of them went crazy. Ben Zoma. Eliezer ben Avuya, he became an apostate. He gave up on God. And only Rabbi Akiva managed to go in peace and come out in peace. But it could happen that if you go to places where you're not supposed to go, maybe you never come back. Or maybe you never come back the same. You're a changed person forever. Soldiers go out to war. Even today in America, right? They go to their missions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, wherever. Hopefully they come back alive. But even if they come back alive, they're not the same person anymore. That's why there's so many challenges in their marriages and they go and they have to go through therapies. Why? They've seen things that they never want to see, no human being should ever see. And they come back, they cannot tell their story, and they become so mentally handicapped with so many issues, right? And some of them sadly don't make it. They don't make it because they just can't live in this world anymore. They can't come back to this world having seen and known all those things. Now that's very much in a negative sense, but this can also happen in a positive sense, in a holy sense, which is the explanation of Orach Chaim about Nadav and Abihu. So get back to the story of Rabbi and Rabbi. You know what was going on over here? You know what was happening over here at this party? Think about it. Of course they were drinking wine. You can't take away the literal story. They were drinking wine. But what does wine do? The Gemara says, it's the next passage, which I'm not going to read for you inside, but the Gemara says that yayin, the word in Hebrew for wine, yayin, the yud nun has the numerical value of what? Of 70. Yud is 10, nun is 50, that's 7. The word sod means a secret, is samach 60, vav 6, dalet 4. It's also the numerical value of 70. So wine and secrets are both connected. And the Talmud says, Nichnas yayin yatsa sod. When you consume wine, secrets come out. When you're drunk, what happens? You lose all inhibitions. Everything comes out, right? No filters anymore. So all the secrets come out. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It depends what's going on. It depends what your secrets are, right? So sometimes when people get drunk, they become rotten people. They say vulgar things. They behave in a violent way. They become hostile. They become so unpleasant to be around. So this guy who's always so quiet and so well behaved, but you didn't know inside he's so dirty and is so messy and is so confused and a terrible person inside, and it all came out when they were drunk. Or you could have somebody inside is so righteous, is so pious, is so beautiful, is so innocent, is so holy that maybe when they're not drunk and they're sober, they're very contained and reserved and restrained. But when they get drunk, Torah spills out and the truth spills out, and they become a ball of light and a ball of happiness and a ball of love, and it all comes out when they're drunk. Being drunk for them might be a beautiful thing. Rabbi, the great tzaddik, he turns to Rabbi Eliezer and says, what are we trying to achieve here at this purim meal? What do we want to achieve? Let's drink of a lot of wine to achieve it. What are they trying to achieve? So think about this. Well, they don't want to die. But we said earlier that the Purim story is the second occasion of the giving of the Torah. And now I want to tell you the full story behind that. Talmud says that when God originally gave the Torah, he picked up Mount Sinai, he picked up Har Sinai, and he held the mountain over their heads, the Jewish people, and he said, if you accept my Torah, good, and if not, here's going to be a burial place. Oh, okay, fine, we accept the Torah. Well, the Gemara comes along and says, here every Jew has a complaint against God. If I violate the law of Torah and you want to hold me accountable, you know what we'll say? I never willingly, voluntarily accepted the laws. You forced me into it. You can't punish me now. We have a complaint against God, so we can never be held accountable. Rava, listen, it's Rava again. Rava comes along and says, it's true that at that time we did not accept the Torah voluntarily. But there was a story in history where all the Jews re-accepted the Torah voluntarily. You know when that was? The Purim story. The Purim story was a time when the Jews were being persecuted. And they could have waved their hands in the air and they could have said, forget about this faith, forget about the Torah, forget about sacrificing our lives. Enough with this persecution. But they didn't do that. They rallied together, men, women, and children, and they studied, and they prayed, and they fasted, and they waged a war against Haman and Achashverosh. That episode says, Rava Hadar Kibluhu. Now they re-accepted the Torah in an even greater and deeper way than the first giving of the Torah, because now it was for real. Now it was on their own accord. Purim therefore becomes the ultimate time of the receiving of the Torah. Shavuot is we were coerced into it. Purim, we accepted it willingly. So on Purim, we're supposed to try to reenact the giving of the Torah. What happened at the giving of the Torah? At the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, God came down and revealed himself at Mount Sinai. At that moment, every single man, woman, and child had a revelation, had an experience like out of body. They were exposed to a truth that no human being can ever normally see. The Talmud says they saw what's normally heard, they heard what's normally seen, their senses were all backwards or forwards, or they're correct. They were seeing the spiritual, they weren't seeing the physical, they were transported to a different place. In fact, the Talmud says that when God revealed himself and he spoke the first commandments, everybody died. Their souls expired. All 2 million Jewish people standing there, all just died because how could you see and hear those things and remain alive in your physical body with your natural human mind when you're being blown away, literally drawn after such revelations? So they all died, and then God had to come and sort of reinvigorate them and bring them back to life. So the giving of the Torah story was a time that we were elevated to see a different reality. Beyond the physical, normal, here and now, three-dimensional reality we normally live in, we were transported to a different place, a higher place, a place of real truth. Says Rabbi and Rabbi, now it's the Purim feast. What do you want to accomplish at the Purim feast? Not just to party, bring the badcha, bring the clown, bring the entertainer, run around, throw hamantash, and that's not the goal of the Purim feast. The goal of Purim feast is to reenact this idea of being able to be transported to a different plane, a different reality, to see the truth behind everything. So Rabbah, now the wine allowed them to open up that way. And now Rabbah starts to teach and starts to pick up his colleague Rabbi Zera. And they're exploring and discussing and elevating and levitating and transcending and getting deeper and getting higher. What happened to Rabbi Zera? He was slaughtered. He died. He dropped dead. You know what the word slaughtered means? Slaughtered, we think it means with a knife. It doesn't have to mean with a knife. The word shachat, the Gemara says, is the same word as mashach. What does mashach mean? To draw after, to draw near. Meaning just the laws of the knife, actually. There's many ways you can cut something. So the way you cut an animal, the neck, from the word b'shachat, what do we learn? You can't chop, and you can't, it's called a slice. It has to be mashach, drawing after. That's the way you got to do it. So Rabbah drew Reb Zera. He picked him up. Right? The Hebrew says, "Come, Rabbah." Rabbah got up and then slaughtered Reb Zera. What does it mean? He got up, meaning he transcended. He picked himself. He was picking up the whole room, the environment. He really brought about the revelation, the reenactment of the truth, of giving of a Torah. And Reb Zera dropped dead. Similar to all the Jews who dropped dead at the giving of the Torah. Similar to Nadav and Avihu who dropped dead in the tabernacle, the kiss of death. They went to a place which the human mind and faculties could not fathom, and so they expired. The souls left them. Why didn't Rabbah die? Reb Zera died, but not Rabbah. So think about this. Think about their names. Rabbah means big, means great, means large. Zera, the word Zera is the Aramaic for small. Rabbah had a very broad mind, a broad soul. Rabbah could handle a lot. He didn't know that his colleague Zera could not handle all that. Zera had a smaller mental capacity, a smaller spiritual ability, smaller faculties who could not handle that much. But Rabbah didn't know that. He thought his colleague is the same as him. So Rabbah starts to share it, to expound and to pick everyone up. And Rabbah can handle it. He can handle living in that world, seeing that truth and still be 2 feet on the ground. He didn't know Zera couldn't handle that. And so he killed Zera, literally. He didn't kill him with a knife. He didn't kill him with any warfare in a criminal way. He killed him because he overdosed him on spiritual delights. He brought him to a place that he could not handle being there, so his soul expired. Unbelievable. That he really did kill him, but not in a criminal way, in a glorious, holy way. Now the next year, he invites him back. Why not? We had such an amazing time last Purim. We accomplished so much. Our whole Purim feast was a reenactment of the giving of the Torah. Come and do it again. More than that. Rabbah says to himself, I imagine over the past year, Rabbi Zera has grown. I'm sure he's grown up larger, bigger. This year, I'm sure he can handle it. So come this year, and we'll both be able to achieve this together without anybody expiring. Rabbi Zera responds, my dear friend Rabbah, thank you for that great compliment you think of me, but I don't think I've grown that much this year. I think I'm still not on your level. And I'm afraid that if I come to your feast and you pick us up and you bring us to that revelation again, I'm still not going to be able to handle it. I'm still going to die. That was the debate between them. It's such an amazing idea because it teaches us that what Purim is supposed to be about. So when the Rebbe spoke this, I want to share 2 stories because I want to make it a little practical. We can say to ourselves, my Purim feast doesn't feel that way, right? How do I even get there? What does it mean in my life? So here are 2 stories. Again, about great tzaddikim, but I want to try to make it a little more practical. One story is told about a great Rebbe. His name was the Maimonides Rebbe. First Maimonides Rebbe, his name was Rebbe Yisrael Tal. This is in the 19th century and early 20th century. Now, 2 things you should know. Maimonides was a group of Hasidim that were very renowned for their nigun, their song, their music. They made beautiful music. There's many Maimonides songs. They made thousands. Many of them are forgotten today, but there's some that we still have. In fact, everyone sings a song in their house. You know this one? So that was composed by a more contemporary Majid Chassid, Rabbi and Shaker, who passed away just a couple of years ago. So, but they have a long history of beautiful songs. Now, the Majid-Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Taub, was also known to be someone who was very large, overweight, and very unhealthy. One time, he had a serious ailment in his leg. And the doctors told him, we need to operate here. If we don't operate, you could lose your leg. On the other hand, you're not healthy enough or strong enough to be able to handle an anesthetic. We can't give you an anesthetic, but we must operate or you could lose your leg. What do you do? So Rabbi Yisrael Taub, the Master Rebbe, said, don't worry. Listen very carefully. When you're getting ready to operate, tell me, I'm going to start to sing one of my nigunim, one of my songs that I composed. And it's actually a very long song. It's a song of 32 stanzas. It's a very famous, not so famous, but it's a very long and powerful song. And I'm going to sing the nigun. When I sing the nigun, I'm in a trance. I enter a different world. I don't feel senses. I'm in a different place. And so he started to sing the nigun. When they noticed that he entered the trance as he was singing, they performed the whole surgery. They finished. He finished his song. He came back. He didn't feel a thing. Even on a minuscule level, sometimes normally on a normal day, you wake up in the morning, you're hungry, you gotta eat breakfast. An hour later, you're hungry, you need your snack. An hour later, you need another snack. At lunchtime, you're even hungrier. And throughout your day, you're always munching on something. Everyone's always munching. But imagine that, remember that day when you have like a serious assignment to do. You've got phone calls to make, you've got stuff to get done, and you're sitting by your desk, by your computer on the go, right? It could go by 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. You didn't feel any hunger. What happened? Every day you're always halaching, you're starving. Today it's already 6 p.m. You haven't eaten a thing yet. You're not hungry at all. What happened? It's very simple. You were transported to a different place. And then for your experiences or the way you are in touch with yourself or in touch with something larger than yourself is different. So or you're immersed in a book, or you're immersed in a song, you're immersed in studying something. You forget about the surroundings. So we could all be in places that we get transported to something a little higher than where we normally are. Now, in that work example, I don't know if it's being transported to something higher, it's just being transported to something, you're preoccupied. But the idea of a Purim party, or the idea of studying Torah, or the idea of getting involved in prayer, isn't just it's about trying to bring yourself, transport yourself to a new space, a higher space that you forget about. Your old self, your physical, mundane, 2 feet on the ground, your needs, your concerns, your worries, your fears, your anxieties, your insecurities, your hungers, your jealousies. No. They don't exist when I'm praying. They don't exist when I'm studying. They don't exist on Shabbat, wherever. I'll tell you one more story. I'm going to have to conclude. The Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shlomo of Liadi, when he was a young adult, he had to make a decision where to continue his studies. He could have gone to Vilna, studied with the Vilna Goyim, or he could have gone to Mezrich with the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, the next Hasidic Rebbe, Reb Dober of Mezrich, and he chose to go to Mezrich. Now, when he got there, he was very uneducated in the spiritual teachings of Hasidism. So the Maggid of Mezrich, Reb Dober, made a shidduch, made a charusa, a match between his son. His son's name was Avraham. He was known as Avram Hamalach, Avram the angel. He was called Avram the angel because he was truly an esoteric spiritual person. And he connected the two together when he said, you guys are going to learn every day for 6 hours together. For 3 hours, the Alter Rebbe will teach the Rebbe Avram the Malach Nigla, Talmud, Jewish law, because the Alter Rebbe was a master in those things. And for 3 hours a day, my son will teach you Nifter, the spiritual, esoteric, Kabbalistic, Hasidic teachings. So each one will teach the other for 3 hours a day. There's many stories about those learnings. But one day, after they were learning the 3 hours of these spiritual, mystical teachings that Rabbi Avram was teaching the Alter Rebbe, and then afterwards, Rabbi Avram walks into the back room and he sees the Alter Rebbe was eating a bagel with, a thick coating of some kind of delicious bread, butter, a bagel with putter, butter, cream cheese, whatever. like a kind of indulgence. And Rabbi Mamach looked very surprised, and he says, that's what you're attracted to after 3 hours of the journey you were just on. You're learning about these esoteric ideas that transport us to higher worlds, that forget about our mundane physical bodies, and now you're gravitating towards this. You got to eat a bagel, I get it, but you have to spread it with butter, and you have to spread it with a little butter. It has to be so much, thick layer of butter. Dr. Rebbe said, I'm literally saving my life right now. As I was learning with you, I felt that my soul is leaving my body. I felt that you were taking me to places that I couldn't handle. And I ran here because I had to touch something very physical. I had to bring some physical delight, to attach myself to it, literally to hold my soul down here in this world. Otherwise, I was afraid I was going to expire. So, in conclusion, Purim is a very serious time. Wine may help it, of course, in the right amounts. And if, when wine comes in, the secrets come out. If you don't have such good secrets inside of you, be very, very careful. But hopefully, with the message and the energy of Purim, we can learn from the Jews back then. And we can re-experience the giving of the Torah in a way that's voluntary and willing by us. And we can experience that. The level of Mesirat Nefesh, the level of devotion and sincerity the Jews had, no matter what, through fire, through water, no matter what the challenges that come our way, we are in, we are devoted, we are committed. And we want to be able to recognize that with conviction, expose ourselves to a world of truth, where all those petty things we often think about and get concerned about, get worried about, don't exist. Push them away, turn off your phone, no emails, no messages, no office, no worries, just the delight of having the Torah, having God, the miracle that God did for us. That we should all experience those miracles once again. We could learn from Rabbi and Rabbi to take our feast to a new level. Fill it with Torah, fill it with song, fill it with a spiritual experience, a holy experience. Hopefully on that moment in the holiest of days, you can taste your true self, who you truly are and truly can be, and carry it with you, even the day after, when you sober up. My friends, Chag Purim Sameach, God bless you. No slaughtering, no killing, but rising to the occasion and picking ourselves up and picking each other up as well. Chag Sameach, and God bless you.
So,